nobody likes planning their own mortality. I mean, would you say that's pretty normal behavior, Drew?
Yeah, I think so.
If somebody asked me like, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" I said, "Well, I think I'm going to wake up, have some breakfast with the wife and kids, maybe head down to the lake. I know they've been looking forward to that. Plan my own death, watch some college football, have a couple beers. I don't know. What about you?" That's not normal behavior. It's not normal behavior. That doesn't mean, unfortunately, that it's advisable. And that's kind of the case with estate planning. I mean, like, most people aren't building their Saturdays around planning their departure from this earth, right? And
That's true.
because
It
of that,
depends on what football conference you root for, but possibly. But otherwise, no.
yeah, typically not. And because of that, right, there's some costly mistakes. And that's what we want to talk about today. I'm joined today by Drew McDowell, who is an attorney, who is a certified financial planner with Mariner Wealth Advisors. My name's Michael MacKelvie. I'm a certified financial planner with Mariner Wealth Advisors. This is Your Life Simplified. We want to talk about 5 estate planning errors that can cost you. Drew, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's a beautiful day here in Florida. A little warm, but otherwise can't complain. But thanks so much for having me. We're excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're a perfect fit for this conversation. I mean, given your background as an attorney, because you want to just maybe give a brief background. From what I understand, though, obviously you were an attorney before. You've kept it to the extent to what you use now, and then obviously you're a certified financial planner, so you're practicing from a financial planning standpoint. So maybe just give a little background on yourself.
Sure. So no, I call myself a recovering attorney. So that makes it brings a little levy to the situation. But no, lucky enough to be a graduate of Mississippi College School of Law, came back to practice law here in Florida in 2012. Was in private practice for a while. Got to do kind of a little bit of everything. We live in a small town. So for those of you that are familiar with the phrase, I had a bit of a threshold practice, meaning everything that crossed the threshold was work I would do. But really gravitated towards estate planning. I really enjoyed the definitive nature of the process and the way that
Mhm.
people actually felt like they got something for their engagement with an attorney. And that,
Mhm.
finality is the wrong word, but in a lot of things in life, we're searching for finality. We're searching for a definite answer and solution. And this is one of those small areas of the law, financial planning, whatever it might be, where you have that kind of definite finality that you can have some control, which is, a nice thing for sure.
Right. Yeah. And, obviously, I think a lot of people go to a financial planner that kind of just expect to get some form of wealth management advice. So I think it's really key for any planner to touch on estate planning because, statistics show roughly 2 out of 2 people will pass away, right? So there's a good chance here that some estate plan will be executed. It's either going to be the government's or your own. So I wanted to start actually by using some celebrity examples as we lead into each of these mistakes. And I think that maybe makes sense. I don't know how you feel about that, Drew, because we're not maybe as memorable as some of these people. So maybe it makes it a little bit more memorable for you. So I want to start with Purple Rain.
Oh,
That's Prince.
let the healing waters of Lake Minnetonka, let
Yeah,
it wash over you.
that is Prince. So April 2016, we lost a legend, Prince, right? He passed away, but what wasn't just shocking about that passing, obviously fairly premature, I think most would consider, was he didn't have a will. So he had a $300 million estate. And that was amongst, he had 6 different siblings. There was even a potential heir that surfaced, including, and this was a federal inmate at the time who was claiming to be Prince's son. So it was kind of a mess. I mean, what can we learn? I mean, besides just some wonderful music from a boy Prince.
Well, the Right Honorable Prince of Pop, the King of Minnesota, unfortunately did not have his estate planning ducks in a row. I think the simplest lesson we can take away is you need to have some sort of plan in place.
Right.
Regardless of what state you live in here in these United States, the government will distribute your assets for you after you pass away.
Mhm.
And that distribution plan might not be what you want. It may not be what you are actually looking forward to or want to have happen. And more specifically, it's a lack of control. You
Mhm.
don't have the ability to make sure certain family members or special needs nephews or people who are federal inmates. You don't have the ability to have actual specific provisions for those special kind of eligible designated beneficiaries. So, Prince, amazing musician, poor estate planner, but I can't play an instrument, so I guess it's all a trade-off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about how many advisors he probably had in his life, just probably an entire conference room full of just advisors. I mean, it's pretty fascinating to think that there wasn't really anything in place there. And I'm sure somebody brought it up to him, at some point in time, but uh, again, nobody likes to plan their own mortality. So number 2, I Will Always Love You is Whitney Houston. Although she could, I mean, gosh, just sing. The songstress passed away in February 2012, but her will was a little bit out of date. So it was drawn up before the 1993 birth of her only child, daughter Bobby Christina Brown, and it was never revised. So not even when she had, and this is in the 90s, a wealth of eclipsing 20 million did it get revised. So um, what can we maybe learn from this example?
Well, I think the quickest way to say is that Whitney needed a better bodyguard, and Kevin wasn't licensed to practice law in any of these 50 states. No, I mean I think that this is also a super common error that people make, which is they step into the estate planning world. They say, "All right, I finally got it done," and they felt that finality that I talked about earlier. And then something
Mhm.
changes in their lives. They have another child. Their child has a child. They get divorced. They get married, all things that Whitney enjoyed during her too brief time on Earth. And so I think
Mhm.
the best lesson and takeaway we can take from this situation is it's not a bad idea to look at your estate plan with your attorney or a certified financial planner or your marital wealth advisor every
Mhm.
5 to 7 years. That's not a
Right.
bad cycle to kind of get in the habit
At
of
the very
doing. And
least.
yeah, at the very least, and my
Yeah.
clients here that we practice with, we try to have a short estate planning conversation at least annually, just to say, hey,
Mhm.
any new grandkids, or is anything changing, or how's this old plan that we had? Is this still going to work? And if you just kind of tick those boxes annually, then you can avoid maybe having to have really big revamps done.
Mhm.
The state legislatures in whatever state you live in will give you some work to do. Eventually, statutes will be updated. Eventually, you will need to make a change here or there, but nothing major.
Right.
As long as you're keeping up with your overall financial plan.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I think it's critical to update it, and any life changes that occur. It's just one of those things where having somebody that's kind of holding you accountable to do this is helpful, because again, it's not the most enjoyable process, right? Um, Number 3 is Capote, Philip Seymour Hoffman. He won the
Good.
Academy Award. I believe it was
Mm.
for Capote, but uh, Iceman, long came Polly reference there. He didn't want his kids to be trust fund kids. I think a lot of people share that sentiment too. And because of that, he chose not to create a trust. So when he died in 2014, again, unfortunately, a lot of these people we're talking about are premature passings. His entire $35 million estate went to his mother of 3 children. And that doesn't seem so bad, except it came with a pretty hefty estate tax bill. Right. So Hoffman erred in thinking that trusts would automatically create an entitled or lazy trust fund kid. And so he didn't set them up. He passed the money on to his spouse. And as a result of that, millions were paid in estate taxes. So, what can we learn from this example?
Well, unlike one of his favorite characters of mine, Brant in the Little Lebowski Urban Achievers, proud
Yeah.
he was not of all of them. Unfortunately, a lot of times people have issues with their children, and in some states, you are actually allowed to disinherit your children altogether. Check with your local attorney and estate planning advisor. But what I would say that a good takeaway from the Philip Seymour Hoffman passing is we have to start talking about familial wealth. you really need to sit down with your advisor, whether it's on the portfolio side or it's on the estate planning side, and have a conversation about, can I trust my children with this money? And I think that if you ask Philip Seymour Hoffman today, would you want to make sure your children had health care? Would you want to
Mhm.
make sure your children could go to the doctor if they needed to? Or maybe they were still in school. Would you want to make sure your children could finish their
Mhm.
education? I don't think a lot of people would say no to those questions. I think they would want to support at least their children's health and education.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a planning opportunity missed for there to be some wise counsel brought to him and say, look, you don't have to create a trust fund baby
Right.
while also creating a trust fund. And there's absolutely, a myriad of recommendations and provisions you can include in an estate
Opportunities.
planning document.
Yeah.
It was a sadly missed opportunity, but certainly, understandable. But I think that with a little bit of counseling, you could obviously have a better outcome.
Yeah. I think something with these types of cases, I think it's important to remember that a number of things can be true at once, right? So, you can there can be the truth that you can create a trust and save a bunch of money on estate taxes, and there can also be the truth that you cannot spoil your kids, right? So both of those can happen. Trusts don't just serve the purpose of passing on massive amounts of wealth to entitled kids. Uh, I think it's far more intricate than that, and you can do a lot more good with it than you think. And perhaps the beauty of it all is you get to build that plan. You get to build that legacy, right? So
100%.
number 4 is the king of pop, Michael Jackson.
Oh, man.
So superstar Michael Jackson, he was worth a little money. His death in June 2009. I actually remember where I was at. I was heading back on the road from Sauvie Island in Oregon when this happened. I think a lot of people actually remember when he passed because he was such an icon. Um, this created a string of court battles. His estate is now worth several hundred million. I think it's like well over 600 million. And one of his biggest estate planning missteps was creating a trust, and this is something that we talk about all the time, failing to fund it. Okay. So what can
Oh,
we
my goodness.
learn from that? What does that mean? And I think a lot of people hear like, hey, you should fund your estate plan, or maybe they don't even know about this. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, Michael told us the answer. It's ABC, simple as one, two, three. You have to do the three steps in order to make your trust
Good
valid.
Jackson 5.
Create it. Yeah, hey, we're trying to get right on cue here. Now, create it. Make sure that it's validly executed in the state in which you've executed, and then you have to fund it. That's the
Yeah.
C. That's the three. That's simple as do re mi. And so, you have to make sure that your trust is properly funded. In fact, quite a few people actually fail to do this. They will spend the money. They'll go to a estate planning attorney. They'll have those uncomfortable conversations where they talk about their own demise. They'll do all the heavy lifting of creating this document and thinking they've got everything in place, and they
Mhm.
never redeed their property into the name of their trust. They never
Yeah.
retitle their brokerage account into the name of their
Mhm.
trust. I can't tell you how many times I have had a potential new client come to my office on the wealth management side of our practice,
Mhm.
and they said, well, I've got a trust, and they would show me their investment account, and it just says their name, not in the name of their trust. And I would ask,
Right.
hey, out of curiosity, why is this not in the name of your trust? And they said, well, my advisors never talked with me about that. Well, if that's the
Right.
main bulk of your assets, you failed to fund your trust, which of course means the trust fails and all that hard work goes out the window. Um,
Right.
so I think, the principal, or pardon me, the king of pop, sorry. We need to make sure that the lesson we take away from the king of pop is, if you're going to go to the trouble of working your whole life to create a legacy that you want to pass on to your family, and you're going to go to the trouble of making sure that it passes the way you want it to, the least we can do is dot all our I's, crosses our T's, and make sure that it is easy as ABC, one, two, three.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, probate is, public to, which in this case it became very public, still is. Um, Certainly more expensive, I would say, just about every single time. Not every single time, but it definitely can be if you have a decent sized estate. And, when you think about just passing on assets in the form of a trust, there's just a lot of misconceptions about it. You get this pretty binder maybe from a estate planning attorney, and you bring it in 10 years later to a financial planner, for example. This is a real experience that I've had. And we look at it and say, well, that's a really nice presentation. You obviously spent a couple $1,000s creating this, but it's not funded. This isn't funded. This is 10 years old. So I think, again, making sure that it's updated, making sure that it's continually funded with the assets, the right assets, because some assets you don't want to place in trust, is certainly something to remember, right?
Oh, 100%. And with we can touch on this in a little bit, but there are a ton of upcoming changes to the estate planning world
Yeah,
may or may not occur
we'll
due to
see.
legislative actions or inactions, and it's certainly something that you just want to have your thumb on, especially if you're watching this podcast video, if you're interested in maintaining not only your wealth for yourself but also for future generations, it's just a
Yeah.
no brainer to knock out.
Yeah, the window may be closing with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsetting, but we'll see. We'll see. I got number 5 for you here, and this is Tony Soprano.
Oh my goodness,
James
James.
Gandolfini, right? So some people would remember, I think most people probably remember him for his iconic role in The Sopranos, HBO show, where he played the mob boss, Tony Soprano. But at the show's conclusion, he appears in good health. Again, much of these people that we're speaking to today passed away a little too soon. And this was the case for him. He suffered a heart attack. And he did have an estate plan. So he had a will, but he only left 20% of his monies to his wife. So that's not necessarily, again, it's not necessarily that he had bad intentions by that. Maybe for whatever reason, he wanted to give 80% elsewhere. But the estate planning world does have some hurdles and some potential obstacles. And it might, again, it's important to separate intentions from really outcomes in this case. And in this case, it resulted in a large outcome, even though he had maybe some good intentions. So, what were some of the errors that James had in this case, only leaving 20% to his wife? What are some of the errors that maybe you saw with that?
Well, he never had the makings of a varsity athlete. I'll tell you that. No, that's an amazing Sopranos reference.
It is.
I think here in the state of Florida, where I'm lucky enough to live and practice the occasional estate planning engagement, we have what's called the marital share, where you are forced, if you are legally married at the time of your passing, forced to leave a certain percentage of your estate to your spouse, and it is
Mhm.
greater than 20%. So
Yeah.
if Mr. Gandolfini was a state of Florida resident, he would have an issue with his estate plan. I think that your point is correct. It's all about intention and
Right.
making sure that your intention aligns with the issues or rules that the state have put in front of you. I think is incredibly important. I myself, followed a couple of different interesting cases along this lines where spouses were not left the appropriate amount of funds, had to then sue the estate to claim their marital share. That
Mhm.
locked down the money for a long period of time. That meant that the intended beneficiaries, some of whom were charitable organizations, didn't get their money for a long period of time. That meant the children from a previous marriage, who were the primary beneficiaries of the estate, but not with the marital share, that meant
Yeah.
they didn't get their money for a long period of time. And of course, guess who got paid all along the way? Lawyers. And so,
Yeah.
I am a lawyer and I'm allowed to say I don't think we should give all of our money to lawyers. And so, I think that if you have that intention, if you have a specific plan in mind, not a bad idea to go get a legal opinion, and not a bad idea to make sure that it's updated every few years, because that
Yeah.
number can change and does quite often change. Not unlike Tony's waistline throughout the series.
Yeah. It did change. Yeah. Um, yeah, he had an estate tax bill of roughly 30 million. So there's an unlimited marital deduction that you can take advantage of. And again, maybe he didn't want to leave all of that money to his wife, but there's just some hurdles that are in place just with, our estate really tax system. The government has to have some process to figure out where monies go if there isn't a clear direction given by the person who's passing it. In this case, there just wasn't enough clarity there, and that resulted in a pretty hefty estate tax bill. So,
Oh, I have an amazing story if you wanted. This
yeah,
actually just came out of the New York State Tax Court a few
I
years
would love to
ago.
hear it.
This is a true story. I'm not going to give any of the details. I'm not a tax attorney. Let me just say that right now. However, very wealthy gentleman, immigrant to the United States, married his first wife in the 1950s. They eventually had a Nevada-style divorce in the 50s, where someone would move there for 6 weeks, establish residency, and get divordivorced.
Crazy to
Years
me.
later, he marries his third wife, and of course, is worth 100 million some odd dollars. Has made an amazing life in America. Um, he passes, decides to leave a large chunk of his assets to his third wife, and the federal government said he did not previously properly divorce the first wife, and
Mm,
so was actually unable to claim the unlimited marital deduction for wife number three. And so the
mhm.
federal government was trying to take a very hefty chunk of 90 some odd million dollars.
Wow.
What is interesting is the state of New York is willing to legally accept what we call the rule of celebration, meaning that if you are legally married in a foreign country, then we are going to accept that marriage here in the United States. Now, this
Hmm.
gentleman got married in Israel for his third marriage, and even though never applied for a United States or New York marriage license, considered his third wife to be his spouse. And the New York State Tax Court actually agreed with him, thereby saving his spouse, 40 some odd $1 million in federal estate taxes. Now, upon her passing, there will be a sizable chunk to be paid. Don't get me wrong, but
Mhm,
this saved it from being taxed twice. And I
mhm.
just think it's just those little idiosyncrasies of life that no one thinks about
Right.
can really come back and play a huge part inside of our estate tax world.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to ask you, and you were just a traditional, let's just say you weren't an attorney or a financial planner, right? Is there a chance that in an 83-year life expectancy, you might overlook something in the estate planning realm? I think there's a fairly high likelihood of that, right? And
Oh,
that's
yes.
and keep in mind too, I think it's roughly like 2/3 of America doesn't even have, a legitimate will in place, and that's of adults. I
Hmm.
think right around 60%. So, um, there's again some pretty massive voids just in this area, and I think it all comes back to, again, nobody likes to plan their own mortality. They're not waking up and building their weekend around this, but that doesn't mean that it's something that you should avoid. Obviously, uh, we want to be responsible. We want to build out our estate plan because we'd rather figure out where our monies go than the government deciding. So, really appreciate you joining me here today, man.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. I didn't think I was going to get to do like an Us Weekly version
Yeah,
of estate planning
you're
101, but I've
actually
enjoyed it very
TMZ.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Welcome. No, no. Again, I just think that sometimes these examples really help cement it for us. These are obviously icons. They're a little bit more memorable than myself, so maybe people can take these examples, use some of these mistakes that maybe some of these people have made, learn from them, and as they're building their own plan, remember, hey, I got to keep this thing up to date. And there's probably more to this than I know. So, what would you recommend if somebody's like, hey, I feel like I need to get an estate plan in place. I'm not sure if it's out of date. What are kind of the steps that you would recommend for somebody to get this process started if they do feel like there's a void in their plan or if they just maybe haven't updated it in a number of years?
Well, the easiest way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time, right? And so I think that you can start small and build on top of that. I have quite a few clients in my life who have said, they don't really want to think about the full dissolution of their estate, i.e., their own passing, but they're willing to talk about a designation of healthcare surrogate or a power of attorney for financial matters. And I
Yeah.
think that if you can just start that conversation with yourself and you could say, hey, I get bonked on the head. Who am I going to put in charge of paying my water bill? I think that's
Right.
a pretty low level idea to think about because, hey, I'm going to get better and I'll be able to pay my water bill when I get better. And so,
Right.
let's just say I'm going to pick my brother. So I want my brother Patrick, one of the other advisors here. I want him to be in charge of my financial assets. If I'm bonked on the head, but I'm going to get better. I think that's a very simple, low hanging fruit
Just to get
approach,
going.
just to get going. And I think that by the time you've knocked out two or three of those documents, you're going to start to have some really hard conversations with yourself and say, well, what if I don't get better? What if I
Right.
get bonked on the head and I don't wake up? Do I
Yeah.
want to make sure that my children are taken care of? Do I want to make sure that the government doesn't get a big chunk of my money? Do I
Right.
want to make sure that my mom or this charity or well, whoever it might be benefits from my career of hard work? And I think for every person, the answer is yes,
Right.
regardless of who that beneficiary is going to be. Um, so yeah, I think that starting small is an easy way to go, and from there build on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, estate planning attorneys can help you with this conversation. But I think, having some, just at least, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to someone else today type deal, right? One step forward. So I appreciate that, man. Thank you. And hopefully listeners found this helpful. Hopefully they found it a little bit more enjoyable. I know estate planning can be somewhat of a dry topic in certain areas. If you're listening to this on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you might be listening, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any content from industry professionals here at Mariner Wealth Advisors. My name is Michael MacKelvie again. I'm a certified financial planner. Today I was joined by Drew McDowell, who's also a certified financial planner and attorney with Mariner Wealth Advisors. This is Your Life Simplified. Thank you for listening. Take care.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. Asset allocation diversification is a strategy designed to manage risk, but it cannot ensure a profit or protect against a loss in a declining market. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP, registered trademark, certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP certification.